Good morning. Okay, today we're welcome to our next Let's Talk Ethics and Integrity. And today we're going to talk about political activity in elections because we are coming into a lot of elections right now. A lot going on, a lot coming up. I want to start this by talking for a moment about how important it is that all of us actually exercise what is one of our most important rights, which is to vote. And you get these, you get people talking about this all the time, I know, this time of year, right? But I do want to, before we get into being a DHS employee and the rules around political activity, I really do want to take a moment just to emphasize how incredibly important that is. That you register, A, and that once registered, you take the time to go vote. We all know here we have our Veterans Wall. This year we're going to be doing our Gold Star Wall. We all talk about the fact that people around the world would love to have the freedom we have to be able to go vote. And then we forget about it. So I actually want to bring something else to your attention. I've spent a lot of my life, as many of y'all may know, involved around campaigns and elections. I think started working with campaigns back when I was still in college. I actually was a campaign manager at one point for a congressional campaign, and as a lot of you know, I was involved in 2 presidential campaigns. One of the things people don't realize is that when you are putting together a campaign strategy and you look out to see, what it looks like and what's your path to victory, one of the most important elements is to figure out who you can keep from voting. All right? People like to say, well, I didn't vote, so I'm not responsible for who's in office. I'm not responsible for what's going on. Yes, you are. You're even more responsible because a non-vote is a vote for whoever won the election. You divide the electorate into people that will vote for you, that you know are your hardcore base, those likely to vote for you, those that are going to vote for your opponent, and those that are likely to vote for the opponent. And then you get into those soft categories, undecided, leaning towards you, leaning towards the others. And the way you win an election is not just to convince some of those leanings to vote for you, but it's to keep all those who are leaning and undecided from voting. Okay? That's how it works. So you need to vote. Make a decision. The other thing is, people think, doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter. You see these stories every year and they are getting more and more. The fewer people that vote, the bigger every single vote is. We had the entire House in the state of Virginia switch for one vote, one person. Okay? I have been in many, many campaign nights where you sit there and you're getting reports in and you are monitoring down to 5, 10, 15 votes. It matters. So vote. All right? That's my lecture on voting, and I won't keep doing that, but really take the time to do it. And don't just vote in the big elections. It is the small elections. It is those people who represent you locally that decide what goes on in your hometown. Those are the ones that really make a difference to you, all right? So don't just do the big ones. It's in those little local elections that 1 vote, 2 votes can shift everything. So with that, I will move on to us talking about, therefore, what some of the rules are around here around elections. First of all, I'm going to let Mary Franklin talk to you for a minute. We do have some, being a state employee, political activities are prohibited at work. You need to vote before and after work, and we do encourage you to be involved. I mean, this is your home before and after work. But Mary, why don't you talk for a little bit about some of the limitations that we do have and the restrictions for activity during the workday?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Because we are state employees and we serve everyone, regardless of what their political beliefs are, their leanings, it's important for us not to even unintentionally appear to be supporting one candidate over another or one political party over another. And that's why at work, during our work time, we shouldn't have flyers posted in our offices. We shouldn't wear t-shirts or buttons, things like that at work. We also should, if state cars, we shouldn't have any political material attached to a state car in any way. And in our personal vehicles, if we are using them for state business and we're going to be reimbursed, we shouldn't have political material on our cars in those certain situations. It is okay to be involved, to work for a campaign if you want to support your candidate, but it's important not to do that while we're at work. And even when we're not at work, it's important that we don't represent ourselves as someone from the department. So, what I do to support candidates after hours, I would not be saying, and I'm Mary Franklin, the Director of Division of County Operations for DHS, and I like this candidate. We shouldn't use our state email, even if it's after hours, to participate in political campaigns or political advertising and things like that.
You become Mary Franklin from Hot Springs.
Mary Franklin from Hot Springs, that's right.
So it's just don't wear your badge after work. Don't do political work during the day. We've actually had situations where people try to use a state computer to do political work, and so there are rules, not just DHS rules, but statewide rules that prohibit that type of activity. Damien, political discussions. We are entering an election year. Political discussions start to take place, and people can be very emotional.
Yes, and like anything, there are always going to be disagreements in politics, and recognizing that everyone is everyone has different beliefs. It's not saying that this person's right or this person's wrong, but putting everyone's feelings into consideration. And sometimes having conversation is good because you see someone else's point of view in a situation. But it's kind of you should always kind of emphasize the similarities instead of always the differences, and that everyone has their right to their own view, and kind of just because they're not saying the same thing doesn't mean that they're technically always wrong.
So if you don't agree with someone, rather than getting into a heated discussion about it, you both should just agree you're not going to talk about it, right? And go exercise your right to vote. And that's the best way to actually make what you believe clear, is to actually vote.
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about if you go beyond actually just supporting a candidate to deciding to become a candidate. And I want to talk first about, before we get into running for elected office, I want to talk first about boards, commissions, some of the things that you might get appointed to or in fact elected to. And there are a whole set of state rules and DHS rules around serving on boards and commissions. And David, could you talk about that for just a moment?
Yeah, I can talk about a couple of things. One main thing that people need to know, if you're appointed or elected to a board or commission for the state of Arkansas, and you're a public employee or otherwise, you have certain requirements that you have to do and to comply with, such as filing a yearly statement of financial interest. Once you're appointed, you have 30 days between the time you're appointed and you filing a statement of financial interest to make sure that everything that you do is a public record. There's no conflicts of interest and that sort of thing. That's what the purpose of that is. It has to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. And then after that, as long as you're on that board or commission, you have to keep filing that by January 31st of every year. In addition to that, there's certain ethical requirements that you should probably maintain as well while you're on the board, such as not voting on things where there's an obvious conflict of interest, either for yourself personally or even professionally. Last week I sat in for Misha Martin on the Child Welfare Agency Review Board, and there's a number of items on the agenda that come directly from DCFS. And I spoke with Misha beforehand, and she let me know that her practice every time they meet is to not vote on those items that she put on the agenda that originated from DCFS. So So I think it's really important just to avoid any conflicts of interest either personally or professionally while you're sitting on that board or commission.
Great. No, that's wonderful. And one last thing is, we periodically, at least once or twice a year, we will have DHS employees who run for office. It can be anything from a local office to actually a statewide office. And so we have put in place some practices around that. And Damien and David, if you wouldn't mind, Damien, talking about what the practice is, and David, since you actually have lived through implementing those practices when you ran, if you could talk about it then from your standpoint, what it's like to be the candidate and to abide by those practices.
So DHS has a political activity policy, which is policy 1025, and then it also references OPM policy, which is 18, which is the state policy. But when, for instance, when David ran, we put up some guidelines that not only protected him running, but also protected the agency. And a lot of kind of what Mary had talked about is, during work hours, campaigning is not allowed. You do that on your breaks, after work, before work. Right now we submit all of our requests in ease for time and leave, and making sure that we also did a daily in and out. So if David was to do something during the day, he would basically say, I'm not working from this time and this time. Then his timesheets and everything would be accurate to basically show, yes, he was not actually on state time during the actual time that he was doing those. But then also, kind of like what Mary said, as far as, not discussing his political at work and, encouraging people to vote a certain way or any of that. But it was basically just guidelines set up that he agreed to, or whoever is actually going to run agrees to, as long as they're an employee here at DHS.
And kind of walking through that, I think that the guidelines that were set up during that period that are still held on today, I think they're really good, because like Damien said, they not only protect the agency, but they protect the candidate as well. Every day I would submit my time, a timesheet basically, to Damien, let him know what time I got here, what time I left, if I took any breaks, any lunch hours, that sort of thing. And I would do that on a routine basis where if you go back and you FOI my time, you'll see in the email system every single day is accounted for, every hour that I worked and everything. And I made sure that I worked, at least 40 hours a week, every week. It didn't interfere with my time. If I needed to go to a campaign event, I would make sure that I was taking personal leave for that. Wouldn't take sick time. Don't take sick time for that, because you'd be committing fraud if you did that. So and again, that really does help, because there were times when I know that some local journalists and everything FOI'd my timesheets, and I saw the FOI come in. I wasn't worried about anything because I knew all my time was accounted for. And sure enough, there were no articles written about that. There was one negative article that was written that said that David Sterling uses his state accrued leave for political events. And I was like, well, that's a non-story. I mean, everybody gets to accrue leave. I chose to use my time on the campaign trail rather than spending it on vacation with my family. And that's just one of the sacrifices you make as a candidate. But I think it was a really, really good rule, and I'm glad we put it in place, because it really did protect me a lot. There was another time that some local journalists made an issue about, and there's actually an ethics complaint filed against me for attending a political event down at the State House Convention Center during work hours, because someone saw me there. Well, they didn't see me there until about 4:45 that day after work hours, but they had assumed that since they looked at the calendar and they saw that political event for another candidate started at 2:30, that I must have been there from 2:30 until 6:30 when it ended. But no, I didn't. I mean, I made very clear that I left work at 4:30. I walked down the street and I got there around 4:45. And if you review the videotape, you'll see just that. So that became a non-issue too. I did have to submit a response to the Ethics Commission and everything on that, and then it just kind of went away after that. But all you have to do is, it's just a do-right rule. Just make sure that you're not campaigning on state time. Many of you might have even talked to me in the elevator during my campaign. How's the campaign going? And normally I would just kind of look down at my shoes and say, everything's going good. How about yourself or something? But I wouldn't talk about the campaign because it's just off limits. It's not what you do here. You don't want to give the impression that somebody you work with is under any kind of pressure to vote for you or anybody else. So main thing is keep all political activity on your time and not on state time.
Very well said. And for anyone who thinks about running for office, please feel free to reach out to Damien, to David, and Damien will put in place the same procedures so that you know what to do and that you can, in fact, make sure that there are no mistakes, that there is a clear record, right? It's always better, we say this all the time, it's far better to have a really clear record than to be explaining afterwards and trying to piece something together. So with that, we will close for today. It's going to be an exciting year, as always, but I think there are always elections every year. And just want to remind you once again, make sure you register to vote. If you are not registered to vote, make sure that you do take part in elections there at home. Make sure you keep your political activity outside the office. Those are the very simple. First two are not DHS rules. They are our encouragement to you as Americans and Arkansans to take part and let your voice be heard. Thank you very much for attending today.